Good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to the October 26, 2023 work session of your Henrico County School Board. The first item on our agenda this afternoon is actually the approval of the agenda. Board members, may I have a motion, please?
I move that we approve the agenda.
Thank you, Mrs. Shea. May I have a second?
Second.
Go ahead.
Okay,
He
Ms. Ogburn. There we
Okay,
go.
I'll take it.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. The agenda is approved. The next item on our agenda this afternoon is closed session. May I have a motion, please, to go into closed session?
I move that the school board go into closed session for the discussion of matters covered under item A1 of section 2.2-3711, the Code of Virginia, 1950, as amended, pertaining to the assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific school board employees.
Thank you so much, Reverend Cooper. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Atkins. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. We will now go into closed session. We will reconvene our work session at the conclusion of our closed meeting. Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome back to the October 26, 2023 work session of your Henrico School Board. Board members, the next item on our agenda is the certification of closed session. May I please have a motion to certify closed session?
I move that the school board certify by a recorded vote that to the best of each school board member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from the open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act and identified in the motion authorizing the closed meeting we heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting.
Thank you so much, Ms. Atkins. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Reverend Cooper. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Closed session has now been certified. Dr. Cashwell will now present items from the superintendent.
Thank you, Chair Kinsella, members of the board, good afternoon. The first item I have for you is the approval of your 2024 legislative priorities. And again, want to thank staff and the board for your tireless work on this, as we've had many iterations going forward to be able to really incorporate the board's feedback and sort of look at last year's legislative session where we were successful and shape this year's agenda. So a revised version of those legislative priorities that includes feedback collected from the last meeting is here and put up for your consideration for approval. Are there any questions?
Board members, do you have any questions? Mrs. Shea.
Just a comment. I want to just draw my colleagues' attention to the written comment that we received today prior to the meeting. Was from some constituents in my district in strong support of the safe and schools and student wellness piece of the legislative agenda.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Shea. Any other colleagues, any other comments before we vote on our 2024 legislative agenda?
I do have a quick question, Madam
Okay.
Chair, if it's okay. Ken, if you don't mind, is when you get this in its final format, what will it be a one-pager kind of thing you hand out, or the trifold brochure we had before, or what's the formatting going to be?
Last year, we went to a one-pager from the trifold.
Right.
And this is last year's copy. It's front and back. So it's posted currently. That last year's is currently posted on our website. We'll get it updated once this is approved. We're poised and ready to get that in design and production, and we'll have that. And also we translate it into Spanish and have it in Spanish as well.
Right.
And we'll have a number of those available for each of the board members for your use to leave behind with the constituents.
And the only reason why I asked was because it goes over to a second page, which I figured it wasn't going to, but I wanted just wondered if it was going to be like last year's, which I thought looked so good. But I do want to compliment you guys on the way this is so succinct. And it's clear language. It's, I like the bullet format. I just like the formatting of it because it's clear to understand for anyone who takes just even a cursory glance at it. And I think being a little bit less wordy than it has been in the past, I think it looks really good. It's sort of encapsulates everything that we've talked about. The only other question was, it starts off with the school board is committed to achievement of public education. I'm wondering, do we want, in the past, I know that we've had the brochure and all that. Sorry, I haven't met. But do we want to only present this as the board is committed? I mean, DLT, the superintendent, we're all committed to these things. And I'm just wondering if we want to say that Henrico County Public Schools and leadership or something like that. I'm just curious about that.
We certainly could. I think we want to make sure that for this particular document, while certainly we second and support the topics that are listed here, I mean, as a school system, as an administration, as a leadership team, and have provided input here, want to be really clear going into the legislative advocacy work. You know, given this is an elected board, we're talking about legislative advocacy, that this represents the board's legislative agenda. So that's why it's written here, not to say that we're not all supportive of the topics and the thoughts here.
I just don't want to have anybody have that impression that it's just the board. I mean, you know what I mean?
I
It's like
understand.
to me, almost, I don't want to use the word disrespectful, but to not include our superintendent, who was also an advocate for all of these, and our members of DLT that are advocates for these priorities, just feels like we're, even in that last sentence of that, you know, we could say the school board as well as our superintendent, Dr. Cashwell. And I don't know, I mean, how anybody else feels about that, or we leave it as it is.
I think as we format the
curious.
final document and as we post it on our site and so on, we can provide clarity around this being specific to the legislative priorities and agenda for legislative advocacy in support of the broader work that we do and support as a school system. So your point is taken.
Okay, thank you.
Board members, any other questions or comments before we vote? Okay. May I have a motion to approve the 2024 legislative priorities?
I move that we approve the 2024 legislative priorities as presented.
Second?
Thank you, Mrs. Shea, and thank you for the second. Ms. Ogburn, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. The 2024 legislative priorities have been approved.
All right, thank you. And we'll be sure as that document comes together in final polish and final form with appropriate language, we will get that to you for use as that legislative season kicks off very soon. All right, the next items I have are related to policy revisions and retirements that you've previously seen, and they all fall under that bucket of leave and HR policies, and those are items 5.01 through 5.17, 517. We've previously reviewed these, and at our monthly meeting, I'll be seeking your approval, but wanted to offer an opportunity for any questions you may still have related to each of these, so I can take them one by one and see if you have questions, with the first one being 5.01, review of proposed revisions to policy P4-08-001, sick leave.
Board members, any questions or comments? Are we going to go one by one? That is what you just
We
said?
can, and perhaps
Perhaps maybe I should ask my colleagues if, does anyone have any questions or comments on any of these policies? Okay, then we'll go one by one. Okay.
Happy to.
Does anyone have any questions or comments on 5.01, review of proposed revisions to sick leave policy? Okay.
All right.
Dr. Cashwell, 5.02.
5.02, policy P4-08-004.
Board members, any questions or comments? Okay, we'll start with Mrs. Shea.
Thank you. I am prepared to take action on this evening, so this wouldn't hold this up. But as we look at the verbiage here, in the last paragraph, it says, and must plan to return to Henrico County Public Schools upon completion of educational leave. And perhaps, as we move forward with this and some other policies that have that intention, be more specific on what that looks like. Does return mean for a day, for a week, for, a school year, that sort of thing? What is our intention as we invest in our employees, which is what we want to do to make sure we're also reaping the return on that investment?
Noted.
Thank you, Mrs. Shea. Ms. Atkins.
And I don't have anything for 5.02. I had something for 5.04.
Okay.
All right, then. Any questions for 5.03, which is policy P4-08-005, flexible sick leave?
Board members, any questions or comments?
Okay, and an opportunity to take questions on 5.04, which are revisions to policy P4-08-006, temporary absence from premises.
Ms. Atkins, we'll start with you.
Thank you. I just had something for consideration. The sentence, teachers who find it necessary to leave the building or premises for a short time must secure permission from the principal before leaving. I'm wondering if we should put principal or designee, because sometimes the principal is not available, and if a teacher needs to leave, I'd like to see something in here that would allow for maybe the assistant principal or the associate principal, or whoever the principal designates, to be able to offer that opportunity without a teacher getting in trouble.
I appreciate that, Ms. Atkins.
Good catch.
We can make that
That's-
adjustment.
That's the language we typically use throughout policy, so thank you for catching that. Dr. Cashwell,
We can make the
okay,
adjustment.
we can make that before this evening. Thank you so much.
Mrs. Coy is writing it down as we speak.
We gotcha.
Thank you. Board members, anything else on 5.04? Dr. Cashwell, item
All right.
5.05.
Yes, and these are revisions to policy P4-08-007.
Board members, any questions on this item? All right, Dr.
Okay.
Cashwell.
Next, policy P4-08-008.
Board members, any questions or comments? Hearing none. Dr. Cashwell.
All right. Next, revisions to policy P4-08-009.
Any questions or comments on this policy? Next.
Okay, policy P4-08-010.
Board members, any questions on this policy or comments? Okay.
Okay, also policy P4-08-011.
Board members, any questions or comments on this policy? Dr. Cashwell.
Okay, also policy P4-08-013.
Board members, questions or comments? Hearing none. Next.
And this is retirement, as previously discussed, of this policy P4-08-014.
Board members, questions or comments? Next item.
Okay, also revisions to policy P4-08-016.
Board members, questions or comments? Next item.
Okay, seeking retirement of policy P4-08-017.
Board members, questions or comments on this policy? Next.
Also policy P4-08-019.
Board members, any questions or comments on this item? Next
Okay.
item.
Proposed new policy P4-08-021.
Board members, any questions or comments? Mrs. Shea.
Let me first start with saying that this is a win for our employees. This is a win for everybody involved. And especially kind of close to my heart as someone who has, a chronic terminal illness. This is so important, being able to support our employees. I just have two questions. One of them pertains to the paragraph on the first page, right above letter C, where it says, employees may not save unused donated leave for follow-up appointments or subsequent absences once they return to work. However, if the employee is placed out of work intermittently in the same fiscal year and for the same condition, they may access unused donations. So I just want to make sure this isn't contradicting itself, because often for the same condition, you will have follow-up appointments intermittently throughout. So I want to make sure that we're not contradicting ourselves with may not be used for follow-up appointments. You can give me a thumbs up if
That is
legally
not
we're
the
good.
intent, and I think we'd be able to work with any employees who might find it a contradiction, but since I see discussion, I will hold to make certain.
And I'm happy for them to kind of discuss amongst them. They don't have
Yes.
to live respond.
Okay.
I think I have an answer. I just wanted to
Okay.
double check. So the out of work intermittently would be the use of additional FMLA. So if you are accessing FMLA, you could use the donated leave under those conditions, which would be different than appointments here or there that you may not be accessing your FMLA for.
Should we clarify?
Clarity, should we not say that?
We could certainly add a clause in there, yeah, to clarify that.
Yeah, I want to make sure that we're, so I tried to pretty carefully read the leave donation and the sick leave bank versus sick leave versus personal leave versus all of this. And I know some of them do have the provisions for follow-up appointments for the same condition. And so as we want our employees to be able to work when they feel well enough to work, but also have the flexibility to still leverage what they need to for their condition that they're claiming leave for. I want to make sure that we're just real intentional with that and kind of how follow-up appointments and same condition interrelate.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for that. We'll make sure we clarify.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, I'll ask a question related to that. If we're going to add this verbiage, can we still vote on this evening? Would we be able to see that before we vote?
We'll make adjustments, and we can provide them for your review at the monthly meeting this evening.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
And then another question on that same policy, and I wish I could find the actual words, but it says essentially that unused days that have been donated to them cannot be saved. Does that make sense? Do I need
It's
to
in that same
follow
paragraph.
the same?
Employees
Okay.
may not save unused donated
Thank
leave.
you. Thank you, Mrs. Ogburn. So where do those days go? Do they go back to the person who donated them? Do they
They go back to the bank.
Back to the bank.
back to the,
Or-
well, this
or-
is the leave donation.
Or to the person who has donated.
Okay, so they go back to
Yes.
the person who donated them. So if that person ended up to need them in the future, they could be redonated.
Correct. Or
As
donated
long
to
as
someone
other
else.
things hadn't
Correct.
been,
Correct.
okay.
Under the same terms and conditions.
I love under the same terms and conditions. Okay, thank you. That clarifies for me.
Thank you so much. Any other questions, comments, or requests for clarity on this policy?
I just have one.
Okay,
I
Ms.
think
Atkins.
for me to better understand the discussion and what the impact may look like, I just want to reemphasize, I would want to actually see it versus discuss it before we vote on it.
Yeah, we'll make sure we provide the written revisions for your review as we
Perfect.
look at it this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hearing no other questions or comments, Dr. Cashwell, next item.
Yes, next one is new policy P4-08-022, reemployment and leave balances.
Board members, any questions or comments on this? Mrs. Shea.
All right, so this pertains to a gap of employment of more or less than 6 months. That's the tipping point after retirement. How long does the payout of benefits, not benefits, of days that we're looking at leave, how long does that typically take? Is that more than 6 months, less than 6 months?
My understanding is that it would be in the first paycheck or two after the end of that employment with us.
Okay, so, okay, thank you.
Right, so, yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's all.
So then we allow the 6 month because,
This aligns with the general government policy on reemployment, so it mirrors so that if you've been gone less than 6 months and you come back, we don't count that essentially as a break in service. If it's longer than 6 months, then you start accruing leave, all of those other benefits that are contingent on how long you've been employed by us, the clock starts over.
Okay, so it's more the clock versus, of
Yes.
course, because at first blush, and I appreciate the clarity that you gave us behind the scenes when we reached out for questions about this, because it seemed as though, oh my gosh, we weren't paying it out for 6 months. It is paid.
Yes.
You will
Yes.
get paid
Absolutely.
if you leave.
Absolutely.
It's just the clock on service.
Correct, correct.
Okay, board members, any other questions or comments on this one? All right, next item, Dr. Cashwell.
All right, and the final in this bucket, new policy P4-08-023.
Board members, any questions or comments on this policy? Mrs. Shea?
And this will be my final policy to have a comment on, Ms. Cloyd. Thank you.
It is the last
It is
I
the last
know, well,
policy.
you know, give it to me where I can get it. I just want to understand, there are a lot of parts and pieces with leave, and I know Ms. Bolden's nodding. Excuse me. I'm just trying to understand kind of a general roadmap, knowing that every employee will be a little bit different in terms of if they needed to take a significant number of days, how they walk through that. So the first thing generally, all these are generally, that they would take would be their sick days and or their personal days, correct?
Correct. So they could take them in any order, but utilizing the days that they have, the leave that they have in whatever form it might take. So their sick leave, their annual leave.
And then they would, sorry, the chip really went down the wrong pipe. And then if they had opted in, or if they had leave donation, perhaps they would use that next. And then the last resort is, not resort, but the last option, if they had opted into it, would then be the sick leave bank. Is that the correct order?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. Thank you. That just, I'm trying to
Yeah.
really digest and understand how all of these policies fit together for kind of the cohesive look for our employees. So that's helpful just to talk through that and understand that. And with that, I am done, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Shea. Dr. Cashwell, next item.
Madam Chair, I do
Oh,
have a
excuse
question
me,
about this
Ms.
one.
Ogburn.
First of all, thank you for including the regulation, because that's where the nuts and bolts are. But I'm wondering, when I reviewed this at this point, is if there's some things in the regulation that should be, because it seems like it's a pretty sparse policy. You know, we're going to establish a leave bank. That's all it says. And then the regulation, I'm wondering, when I look at the regulation, even the membership should be there, or the enrollment period, because that's not likely to change. It seems like to me that's part of policy as opposed to regulation. And then, you know, the maximum usage, the nuts and bolts of it can be in the regulation, but I'm just wondering what anybody else thinks, that maybe, you know, if in order to understand the sick leave bank at all, you're going to have to go to the regulation. There's no information here other than we reserve the right to abolish it. You know, we can, and then there's a regulation. It's not much here. And I just felt like even eligibility, membership, something should be included with the policy, so somebody could say, well, does this apply to me or not? Do I keep on reading? And then if they're not even eligible for membership, or they're not eligible for it, it would be good for them to know whether they need to keep reading, or I don't know. I just felt like it was just too sparse for, because it really has no information other than we have one.
And I'm happy to opine on that if it's helpful.
go right, yeah.
Sure, I mean, or either way, I didn't want to.
I think generally, given the operational nature of the sick leave bank, that was why initially we composed it in that way. And certainly any of the rules that are established in writing in the regulation would apply to the employee, whether it's membership or eligibility, enrollment. That being said, it's certainly the discretion of the board to determine what you want to put in policy.
I mean, when I read it, if I look at the, the membership clause, even that, just A, could be put over in the policy. It says the same thing, but it tells the person, you know, all interested benefit eligible may elect to enroll in the sick leave bank. Just, it seems like to me that's very basic information. And basic information should be in the policy, and then the regulation should be more the implementation. To me, that's more, should be in the other part. Feel free.
I'll chime in.
I was going to say, Chair, did you want to call on the member?
Ms. Atkins?
Yeah, I'll chime in. I agree. I think it's important not to put the coverage eligibility
Right, I
pieces.
agree.
That I probably would have some concern over and would give me great pause. However, the membership and enrollment, specifically the one sentence, membership in sick leave bank shall be voluntary, that one makes sense to me to be in policy. I will probably want to learn more if we talk about the Virginia retirement system. I think we could point to it.
Right, I agree.
Instead of to that paragraph. And regarding the enrollment period, I do think that second sentence makes sense to me. A benefit eligible employee who does not enroll, yada, 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 yada. So I agree with specific sentences within both to put in policy.
Well, and the thing is we could put them in both. You're absolutely right. Leave it in the regulation, but put some of these general comments about what the sick leave bank is, what the membership is in the policy, and it's going to be there twice, that's fine. Right, and I think it actually, because right now, all it just says is we have one. Doesn't say, you have to go to the regulation to find out if you're even eligible, if you're, what that membership is. I just, anyway.
Mrs. Shea, comments, questions to Ms. Ogburns?
I don't have a huge issue with leaving it fairly vague, provided that the regulation is also linked in board docs so that it is like immediately visible. But I also think there's, quite a bit of, weight here with adding some of the more general statements. When I was reviewing this and I was kind of comparing and contrasting to the catastrophic leave pool, since they're similar but different, I continued to miss in the enrollment period that last sentence, an eligible employee may one work day, and I kept looking for it. I kept looking for how do I obtain membership. So I don't know if we can use some creative white space there or repeat it under the membership line, but I think that's really important as our employees decide if they want to enroll or not, to know what the cost to them is. So either some white space or moving it above so that it jumps out to our employees as to what the cost to them to opt in is.
Well, personally, I think that should be in the policy. In order to even start this process, you must enroll in the sick leave by donating the hourly equivalent of one work day. So for example, if I'm an employee, I want to look at the sick leave bank policy. If I haven't donated, then I'm not going to read on. I'm going to know this doesn't apply to me. So maybe just some shifting around. I agree with Mrs. Shea, that should be a standalone sentence right at the top, because if you haven't done that and you haven't opted to enroll by donating, then this doesn't apply to you.
You're not eligible.
Then you're not eligible. And so to me, that's one of those key things that should be in the policy, that for all interested, up with all interested may enroll, and eligible may, if you look and take those 2 or 3 sentences and put them in the policy and here, I think it would be clearer to our employees as to who this applies to.
And then once uploaded, it would be linked. The regulation would be on the policy,
absolutely.
right?
Yes,
So
and
it's very clear.
And as
It
far
doesn't
as-
come across that way
correct,
currently.
and as
but-
far as the regulatory pieces and the operationalizing of it, as we're working with employees and we're finding there may be any points of clarity needed, adjusting the regulatory pieces is possible at any point going forward. So we'd be able to continue to do that. And as we create other materials for employees to explain things, we're not always pointing people back to the policy or the regs around particular things. Like, we have one-pagers about things that are policy in nature, but employees need to know. We could certainly create some material for employees that would be easier. What about sick leave? What about, FMLA? We have some things like that. In other words, we wouldn't expect that everyone would have to, dig through this for the understanding, but we would want the basis to be here. So I think what I'm hearing, if the board I'm feeling like there's consensus to make some adjustments to pull some of the pieces from the regulation into the general policy language that aren't operational and procedural in nature, but give more of an explanation related to the policy. And then certainly, if we continue to need to fine tune the regulation as we're working with employees to operationalize this, we can certainly add clarity going forward.
Board members, are you okay with the understanding? Any questions or comments as to the understanding that Dr. Cashwell just presented back to us?
I think, absolutely, and I think all we're doing is shifting. Thank you. Shoot. Thank you. It's a hard button to push. All we're doing is moving the information. It's the same information, it's just relocating it a little bit, so it's not a substantive change in the in the policy itself, it's just reorganization.
It's duplicative in some cases,
Exactly.
but for clarity. So if we could please do that so that the board members can see it before we vote this evening.
We will work diligently to
Right.
make that timeline.
Thank you so much, Ms. Coy. Dr. Cashwell.
Okay, so that concludes the policy section there, and I appreciate the feedback, and we'll work to get those adjustments before we seek your approval and have those for your review at our monthly meeting. The next item is a first look at a review of our capital improvement plan for fiscal year 2024, 2025, and also providing a decades-long look into fiscal year 2033, 34, and Lenny Pritchard is here to give you a look at that. And just from a timeline perspective, as we get started, we'll have an opportunity also to review this at our next work session, and then would be seeking approval the November 9th monthly meeting.
What if we just took that?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Dr. Cashwell. Today I will share our proposed capital improvement plan for the fiscal 2024-25 year, funding request, and share our tentative long-range capital plans through 2033-34. Each year, the board is asked to consider and approve a capital improvement plan, which includes projected funding amounts needed for maintaining and growing our facilities, as well as funding for transportation and technology infrastructure. The CIP is only funded 1 year at a time, but to provide context for the current CIP under consideration, we also provide the board a look at the division's long-range capital plans going out a decade. Doing annual CIP planning allows the division to develop and maintain a comprehensive list of planned upgrades, renovations, and improvements, and schedule them as funding is available, as well as to consider how bonds may be leveraged to fund such needs. While we know our plans and needs can change and do change year to year as new CIPs are introduced, the long-range planning keeps us focused and on track with keeping our buildings in good condition for teaching and learning. Before we look at the proposed CIP, I'll provide an historical picture of our current school facilities. On the screen, you can see a historical timeline with original construction dates of our schools by decade. We have 100 years of school construction represented here, not including construction renovation projects. As you can see, our first schools were opened in the 20s with Montrose, Short Pump, and Varana Elementaries. The original structures for each of these still stands as part of the current school complex. You can see that as populations grew in the county during particular periods of time, so did construction efforts or school construction efforts, with the most growth boom taking place in the county in the 1950s. This slide provides an overview of our schools. Henrico County Public Schools has 73 schools encompassing more than 7.6 million square feet. 72.6 of our facilities are more than 30 years old, and 60.3 of our facilities are more than 50 years old. I will now move to our next highlighted area to provide an update on the 2016 and 22 bond projects and our other current projects. We are finalizing the last of the 2016 bond projects, and I am pleased to share updates on Adams Elementary. Design is completed and the construction rebid has been moved up from late December and will go out next week. Construction should begin in February, March of 2024. Once again, we want to share our gratitude to the citizens of Henrico for the overwhelming support of the 22 bond referendum. This will allow HCPS to address school construction projects over the next 6 years to address aging infrastructure, potential growth and development, and ensuring innovative teaching and learning environments. This list on the slide notes the specific bond projects that were approved and planned and a time frame for each project. Year one projects have already begun with the design of Longin and Jackson Davis Elementary School. Mosley Architects is the designer for these prototype projects. Community meetings have already been held, and we will expect this to go out for construction bid in March of April of 24. We would like to again say thank you to the citizens of Henrico County for their continued support of HCPS. This slide shows the funded projects that were started in fiscal year 2022. You'll note the important career and technical program expansions and renovations for both the ACE centers at Hermitage and Highland Springs High Schools, which were approved by both this board and the Board of Supervisors and funded in a previously approved CIP. The ACE projects were designed by Quinn Evans Architects and construction by Cambridge Construction Company. Construction is nearing completion on both projects and hopefully opening for our students in January of 2024. These projects will ensure world-class CTE programming and state-of-the-art teaching and learning spaces, as well as 900 more seats for students interested in participating in these programs. The campus of Virginia Randolph, previously listed as a project for future year on the CIP, was funded through the ESSER 3 grant. Whoops, sorry. This project for a renovated and rebuilt campus of Virginia Randolph will allow the division to expand innovation, one-of-a-kind alternative programming to meet the diverse and unique needs of our students. The project has been designed by Mosley Architects, and Cambridge Construction has started the project with the new building as the first phase. Using meal tax funds, we have begun the process to phase in and build 3 new auditoriums on our campus-style middle schools. Quinn Evans has been selected for the design for all of the auditorium projects. Tuckahoe will have a school-based community input meeting scheduled soon and plan for a construction bid to go out in spring of 2024. We will then start paperwork for Brooklyn's auditorium after that. The CIP cycle allows us to plan our future projects. This slide lists future projects not shown on our current CIP draft, but which represents long-range plan, projection planning and planning efforts. The list represents future projects currently identified as needing to be addressed in years 8 through 10 of our long-range plan. As long-range planning continues, additional projects could be added. The first 5 schools on the list were evaluated in our first capital facilities pre-planning study and are listed as renovations accordingly. The cost will have to be determined once a starting time is designated for these projects, so that the cost also includes inflation for that time. The last 5 schools on the list are in the process of a capital facilities pre-planning study to determine priority order and whether they are best suited for rebuilding or renovation. If we remain on track through FY33, We will have renovated and/or rebuilt all schools in Henrico built prior to 1990. Looking a little beyond 10 years, we can see that we will be back to the very first schools that were renovated in the late 80s and 90s. These schools shown in red represent some of our oldest original structures with added additions throughout the years. These schools are also undergoing a capital facilities pre-planning study. Our ongoing capital facility pre-planning study will provide systematic evaluation of each location, as well as the ability to consider replacement of facilities in lieu of renovation. The schools will be evaluated based on structure components, that's mechanical and structural, facility site layout, and flexibility of the existing plans in circulation. The results allow for well-informed decisions which support responsible planning and long-range capital improvement goals. We do recommend that all school facilities go through this type of evaluation as part of the CIP planning process. Looking now at the mechanical funds included in the CIP, you will note that the current allocation is $1.5 million. The request for 2024 is $8 million. We recognize that this is a significant increase, but we are preparing for the elimination of other funds that have been available to ACPS through ESSER funds and grants. To put it simply, additional funding is needed to keep up with our mechanical breakdowns, aging systems, and yearly inflation. In the past 4 years, schools have spent over $22 million using ESSER grants, meals tax funds, and on top of the $6 million provided for CIP funding the past 4 years. This equals $28 million spent on heating and cooling, and we have yet to reduce the mechanical project list. ACPS has received the same $1.5 million CIP mechanical funds since 2000. This is not enough to reduce our mechanical projects. Looking at roofing projects, replacing aging roofs at schools is not just a matter of convenience, it's essential to the integrity of the building, energy efficiency, health, aesthetics, compliance, property value, and cost savings. Proactively addressing roof issues ensures that the school can continue to provide a safe and conducive learning environment for years to come. The numbers shown on this slide are based primarily on our metal retrofit roofing systems. We have some aged slate roofing as well as low slate membrane roofing to consider as well. In order to address our aging playgrounds at our elementary schools, this CIP seeks to program $1 million to establish an ongoing replacement plan, allowing equipment to be replaced every 11 to 12 years to ensure current safety standards are met. Each elementary school has a playground set for grades K through 2 and another for grades 3 through 5. Each playground set costs $150,000, each totaling $300,000 per school. We identified some one-time funds to begin playground replacements for our most aged equipment immediately, but with this $1 million CIP request, we will begin replacing our 32 oldest structures in most need of replacement and then ensure ongoing replacement cycles as needed. I would also note that when we first began the playground replacement process with cost projections, we planned for 4 projects each year. With increased cost, however, that $1 million will fund 3 schools a year. We continue to leverage meals tax funding for deferred maintenance projects at our schools. We remain grateful to both the school board and the board of supervisors for this funding to help maintain our 73 facilities. The funding has been utilized for security projects such as vestibules and camera systems replacements. It has also allowed us to replace gym floors, bathroom upgrades, carpet replacement, lighting upgrades, and parking lot improvements. Annually, meals tax funds are used for projects across all school levels and all 5 magisterial districts. We will continue to use the $9 million meals tax money on various deferred maintenance projects at schools not covered in the CIP. To date, we have done 425 meals tax projects at a cost of over $87 million across all schools. I'd like to thank this board and the Board of Supervisors for the support to replace our aging bus fleet. Last year, CIP included important funding for bus replacements. Since the approval of the last CIP, we have used CIP and ESSER funds to purchase 147 full passenger buses with climate control and 76 exceptional educational lift buses with climate control. This totals 223 new buses purchased the last 4 years with this board's help. These funds have allowed us to decrease the bus fleet's age, thus reducing fuel costs and repair costs. It has also improved driver workspace, as all new buses are equipped with climate control and technology upgrades that will help make the department improve on efficiency and effectiveness. Transportation funds in the CIP are also important as we address the needs of our aging vehicle fleet. These are our work vehicles that are not just our school buses. Just as student transportation is important, we must maintain an infrastructure for ACPS vehicles that will allow us to continue to service our school division. And this CIP funding of $6 million for vehicle replacement will ensure we address and maintain our aging bus and vehicle fleet. I would like to again say thank you to this board and the board of supervisors for support technology infrastructure funding. Last year's $2 million CIP commitment provided additional funding to continue our large-scale technology project to provide innovative and the latest generation of display technologies in ACPS classrooms that did not have display technology or had old unsupported display technology. In phase 1 with technology funds, we purchased 1,400 Promethean panels, which allowed us to fit 35% of our classrooms receiving new panels across the district with a focus on the schools and the classrooms most in need. In phase 2, in FY 22-23 with CIP funds, we placed an additional 265 Promethean panels in classrooms across all levels. And in phase 3, in 23-24, these CIP funds are allowing us to purchase an additional 365 Promethean panels to upgrade display technology in all of our classrooms across the division. And this concludes the presentation. We will be seeking the board's approval for our preliminary CIP at the November monthly board meeting, and then we'll provide our proposal to the Board of Supervisors so that it may be considered during their budget deliberations. Once approved by the supervisors, it will return to this board for your final approval. And at this time, I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Mr. Pritchard. We're so appreciative. I'm going to start today for questions and comments with Ms. Atkins.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a few responses, and I'll start with our schools. It's great to see the progress that we're making. I'll also ask that we explore sources for funding with our Board of Supervisor counterparts to add John Rolfe Middle School to the list of projects. I would hope much, much sooner, whether it's the 23-29 plans, but certainly sooner than what we have it slated for. Both John Rolfe and Quioccasin Middle Schools were constructed in the 1970s. And I think that's very important. I know we have a process that we use so that we are using a system that makes sense so that we can do the best we can to be fair. However, there are always other important factors when we look at whether we're rebuilding, adding on, just trying to improve our buildings so that our students can have a 21st century level education with learning. And so please do look into that and explore that, and I'd love to get an update once we learn more about the possibilities there. The other part that I want to draw our attention to is our high school culinary arts programs. I know that they travel quite a bit, and if you could share with me, we may already be exploring this, but the possibility of our culinary art programs to have a van for transportation as they continue to service the division, service students. I think it would be wise that they also are added to the list for a vehicle. Is that something that's on there already?
Not to my knowledge,
list.
but it's something that we can look into and we can provide an update as needed.
Wonderful. The other area that I'd like to learn more about is, it's been a while. I'm looking at the last update on our vehicles for driver's education, as well as for CTE and family engagement. I see that some of the vehicles we ordered have been received, but I would like an update on the vehicles that our students certainly need for the driver's ed. We want to make sure that they are learning how to drive in good vehicles. And so if you could provide that for me, and again, it's for driver's ed, family engagement, CTE, and facilities, an update on where we are with that.
Yes, ma'am. I'll be glad to give you an update. I know that when we started down this road last year, replacing our vehicles other than buses, we went through some of the same issues that we've constantly had with the supply chain issues. And while we have started receiving some of those vehicles, some of them have not come back in, but I will be glad to give you a detailed report of the vehicles that have come in and where they've been placed and what we're still waiting to expect to come in.
What are we doing in the meantime while we're waiting on the vehicles?
Well, we're doing the best we can with what we have. I mean, but that is what drives maintenance cost up when you don't have newer vehicles. But I mean, I know that we've made adjustments through our budgets to accommodate that as well.
Are we exploring renting vehicles in the process? You know, while we're waiting, is that feasible or no?
I mean, it's something that I think that we could look into.
Okay, because
Yes.
I'm more concerned, all of these areas are important, but when we're teaching our children how to drive, I think that we want to make sure that we are putting them in the best vehicles possible. So I appreciate your response, and I look forward to an update on these. And it's quite a bit of money. It's disappointing that they are on backlog, and I know we're doing everything that we can. I just want to make sure that we are trying to explore everything in these different spaces. And I know I'm just going to advocate for our family engagement teams who are going out to families quite often. And I have witnessed some of the vehicles myself. And to those, I want you to know that if you are in those situations and you are in those vehicles, that we are working very hard to find ways to ensure that you are getting to these families that need you as best as you can and safely. The most important part of this is just being in a safe vehicle. So I want you guys to know that. And I'm glad you've come. If you could share an update, that would be great.
Absolutely. I can speak for family and community engagement. We received a fleet of about 30 new cars and trucks. And so earlier this year, we had a long wait, but Lenny's team and John's team as well were really persistent in making sure that we got vehicles. So we are up to speed and got more than we expected.
I am so happy to hear about that because I'm just going down this extensive list. And as I keep looking and I'm telling myself I'm done, then I'll see a whole nother category, whether it's, like I said, CTE, the facilities team, and I'm looking at the dollar value, and it's quite a bit. So I'm very happy to hear that. Thank you so much for that update. And that's all that I have.
Thank you so much, Ms. Atkins. Reverend Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Pritchard, thank you again for this exhaustive update. Appreciate that. Question that I have, question that I get quite frequently is in regards to middle schools. With plans cited for the construction of new elementary schools, recent rebuilds for 2 high schools, and all the growth particularly projected in northern western Fairfield District corridor, how do we plan for middle schools? Meaning, what considerations are taken into account to have a new middle school constructed? How do we base that?
Are you talking about a replacement of our existing middle schools in general?
No, new one. Just
Well, I mean, I think there would be a capacity need that would come up and look at that. And I know that that's through school planning and also through the county planning department. We work hand in hand in looking at these things, and that there is going to be an elevated increase of student enrollment in a particular area. A lot of the development that is taking place is this urban mixed use, which has not really yielded the students. With the growth of those particular developments. So we have been kind of stabilized at that point, and we've actually seen, you know, with our enrollment trends, an actual slightly decline. So there hasn't been any kind of need or push for that part of it yet for a middle school.
No, I appreciate it. And
Yes.
it's important for people to hear that, just to know that we do make sure we're ahead of what might be projected per the yield. Next question quickly, the auditorium projects, how much are they costing? Are they the same price per?
They will be. I mean, we're hoping that over the course of time, it doesn't catch us. I mean, as inflation starts to increase up, I mean, we will know once we put it out to bid what we're going to face at that particular point in time. But they are on back-to-back heels of each other. So as we get one up and running, the process will begin for the other. And once that one's up and running, we will begin the process for the next one. So we are looking for this to be consecutive projects back to back to back.
Really excited about all three. On mechanical heating and cooling, we all know the challenges that we experience, and you just basically said we don't have enough money to keep up with the need for replacement and fixing. What can we do proactively next year to make sure that what we kind of experienced this year may not happen next year? Or, you know, what are your thoughts?
Well, one of the things that I know that we've done is we're going to go back through and turn systems on a lot sooner, so that way we can troubleshoot problems sooner rather than closer to the date of when faculty members do come back. We do try to be prudent with taxpayer dollars and be concise about when we turn those back on. But given the nature of what's happened and looking at some of our systems, it would be best to turn them on and go through there. And I know that once we started our HVACs back up, that they never really came off that Friday of, I think it was the 19th of August. They stayed on all the way through September. So we ran those things to make sure that cooling stayed in our buildings at least all fall.
Yeah, and I would note that, you know, certainly lots of proactive strategies to make sure we're looking at our systems often and early, and particularly as we come back online after the summer months. But, you know, I would note that, and I think Lenny pointed out, the allocation under that area of our CIP has been the same for what year did you say?
2000.
2000. So, you know, certainly we know even if systems were just aging out normally, if you would just account, you know, for inflation, that's a significant increase. So we have to make up the difference otherwise. So, you know, we certainly don't put off systems work because of the cost. And certainly we have to find other ways to fund it. And we've been able to leverage these additional grant monies and so on. Any other funding source, it's meant shifting things throughout our CIP because we're going to get the work done. But what we'd like to do is have a CIP that has that line item accurately reflect the kind of funding we're actually spending. We've been actually spending much more than that amount, even though that's what we were allocated. And so what it means is pulling it from other places.
Well, you know, that's definitely a line item that we need to have increased. I mean, definitely agree with that. Last question for me pertains to playground equipment. Thank you for clarifying the process, the 3 per year with the money allocated. Do PTAs or any outside corporate funding play any part with our playgrounds? As far as do individual schools, do they raise money for their playgrounds?
I know that it has in the past, but these numbers have gotten so large, most PTAs can't raise that kind of funding.
And we're committed. That's
Yes.
a part of the school and the school programming, and so that's part of our responsibility and upkeep. We certainly wouldn't look to a PTA to do that. Certain beautification projects, whatever. I do know in the past there have been some playground-related PTA projects, but it's our commitment to make sure we're keeping our playgrounds up to date and meeting all the requirements needed for those structures.
Thank you, Ms.
Dr.
Pritchett.
Cashwell has asked for a baseline for all of our schools across the counties to remain equitable, so.
And thank you for that,
Yes.
that last statement, because you know I was kind of going with that. So thank you for
Yes.
that. I'm done, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Cooper. Ms. Ogburn.
Thank you. I'm going to chime in on the PTA playground thing. That was one of the first projects that I worked on as a parent when I moved here in the late 90s, was building the playground at Short Pump Elementary. So then they cost $40,000. Now we're looking at $150,000. So I am so glad this has become a priority and that we're not putting this on the backs of PTAs. It's become a number that PTAs just can't do. And we were able to do it back then only because the Board of Supervisors allocated matching funds for what we raised. They matched, and then we were able to build playgrounds. But it shouldn't be on the backs. You're right, Dr. Cashwell. It's part of the school. It's part of our PE program. It's part of what we offered children. It used to be schools were not built with playgrounds, so PTAs had no choice. But now they are, and so I'm really, really glad to see that change. I think that's a definite positive step in the right direction, but off of the backs of our parents. But I wanted to go back to Reverend Cooper's discussion of the mechanical. You said there's a shortfall. We're not covering, the budget amount doesn't cover the expense. So what is the shortfall? Do we have a number of how much more we are spending than that number, that line?
Approximately. So we've been allocated the 1.5 million. We believe we need 8 million. So the delta would be about 7 million on an annual basis for the heating and cooling. And then for the roofing, I believe the delta is about 3 million. So had been getting 1.5, seeking 4 million there.
Right. Well, and I mean, obviously, with the increase in cost, and it's hard to get these items these days, I'm sure that that has added to the cost here recently. But I think it would behoove us to be very specific in this ask when we take this forward to the Board of Supervisors and say, this is how much we weren't able to cover, even possibly listing those projects and saying we had to move funding from here and there so that it's very clear what the need is and what the amount is.
And I would say they've been good partners in this,
Absolutely.
and that sometimes they've allocated funding to cover the items we've needed because they weren't able to be covered here.
Right.
But yes, I think, what we'd like to do is have that sustainable source through the CIP rather than, going over budget and having to tackle and get other funding sources and allocations as we go, since we know pretty regularly, I mean, the data we can look at over the years on what's actually spent on that line item versus what was allocated.
Well, I think the more transparency we have on this as to, what's not covered, I think is helpful. Not only to our constituents and stakeholders, but to the Board of Supervisors as the funding body. They need to know that if they've allocated a certain amount of money and it's not covering the cost, then it's got to be made up somewhere else. But second question, well, probably third, but are we going to next month get a list of our meals tax projects, or does that come later?
Yes, we'll get that to you. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
And then the bond referendum projects, if we could go to that chart, that's my last thing.
I think it's slide 6.
Just the timing of the bond referendum projects.
Did I miss it?
And full disclosure, obviously, Mr. Pritchard and I have talked about this before the meeting. And so I just want to be clear. I am concerned about the placement of the West End Elementary School new construction. I've let Dr. Cashwell and Mr. Pritchard know because and we've talked, without enrollment numbers, which we will get next month, it's hard for me to look at this list and go, okay, that makes sense, mainly because we always put capacity before anything else. And that is a chronic problem in the Three-Chop District. And we have schools that are operating, obviously Deep Run is over capacity, but this not a high school on there, but our elementary schools are running at high capacity, and our teachers are having, it's the most consistent issue that is brought to me by teachers and parents, is large class sizes. It is persistent across the district, and so capacity issues drive the train. And so I know with Jackson Davis, and as an aside, I am so appreciative of our community meetings that we've had in the last week, and responding to concerns of the neighbors that we met with just last night. And here, having those meetings with the staff and with the community as we are literally putting a construction zone in their neighborhood, I think is such a valuable thing. So I'm really appreciative of your efforts, Mr. Pritchard, and for the team, for Mrs. Moore and everybody to get that started. But after Jackson Davis and Longin are done, we'll really need to closely monitor what relief that those two projects give to the surrounding schools. And I think that will give us the information we don't have yet. So I would just ask as we go forward that we
Yes.
really closely monitor. I know we are really tight in some of the schools. We may not be over capacity in every school, but we're getting close. And so that the placement of an elementary school, to me, I would like to see why I know that we've done the feasibility study, we've done this, and we're trying to be very practical as to why we place things when we do. And it's based on need, but we usually put capacity before. And so
I would note that, and absolutely, you're absolutely right, a number of factors. So when the bond, when we were pitching those bond projects and as it was voted upon, this was the order established at that time. And it did take into account, of course, we have current year membership we'll be analyzing to juxtapose to this, but it was done based on membership and enrollment and capacity at the time, as well as age and condition of the buildings. And, while we'd love to put all of those in 2023, 2024, looking at issuing debt capacity, bond funds, how they are allocated over time, the costs of each of these projects, and then what makes sense fiscally over that period of time.
Right.
So sometimes they were paired based on general cost along with prioritization. And so to your point, from a capacity perspective, we know that one piece of that puzzle is additional capacities created at Longin and Davis, and then how does that have an impact and so on. And then the build outs for new development, both related to the Fairfield area and the West End area, the way those build outs are timed, we were comfortable with this timeline based on what we were getting for information there and sort of where we are with capacity. But, we know that, the best laid plans, right? We're going to certainly take a look each year. There could be unforeseen enrollment or capacity trends coming our way. Certainly right now, we're trending down, where in past years, and you'll see at our next meeting, we're finalizing the enrollment data and trend data, but I know even looking at state trend data for public education K-12, it's very much flatlining and lowering. And we've seen even last year when we looked at capacity, a number of our schools that had been tight, we've seen lessened capacity issues. So that's something we'll be watching too, because we certainly don't want to be building more when we have fewer students, projecting even out to 2026 and 2028 and making sure we're monitoring that.
Well, and see, when I look at schools that have trailers, and I know that some of those will be eliminated by the expansion of Davis and Longin, but I look at where we do have trailers at Ridge, at Three Chopped Elementary. There are schools that we have trailers. I just want to be sure that we're really paying attention to the numbers, because it's a numbers-driven game. The other concern I have with putting something out that won't even start until 2028, that means there's no way it can open until at least 2030. And that's a long time to ask people to be in a school that's crowded. And as Reverend Cooper rightly pointed out, we have a lot of new construction and development in the northern part of the county, in the Fairfield area and the far west, and where Fairfield and the West End and Three Chopped and Brooklyn all kind of come together right there at the top of the county. There's a lot of development planned. And that's what concerns me, that if it's out there 7 years and you look at Quioccasin and Johnson and Fairfield, it always happens that when we do these projects, sometimes they come out more expensive than we anticipate, and the bond funds don't go as far as we thought we were. And that's why I'm concerned about it, is that there's possible with either cost overruns, which we can't anticipate until the time the bids are out and all of that, that it has happened before where we go, oh, well, we don't have as much money for this project as we thought we were going to by time we get to the end of it. So when a capacity project is at the end, that's what concerns me. So I'll just, I know you'll be monitoring it as we go forward, but that's, the nuts and bolts of it for me, is that funding, it's a limited pot of money, and if we get to the end of it and the other projects have gone over, we may not have the funding for that capacity project. So anyway, I appreciate just the careful watching as we go forward and look forward to getting those capacity numbers in November that we will put with this, do it together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Ogburn. Mrs. Shea.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Pritchard, thank you for this robust look at many different angles of operations and their funding. I want to, 3 in a row, loop back to that mechanical and roofing line item. And it's already been asked and answered, but let's just say one more time. When's the last time, how long has that been stagnant? Since what year?
2000.
2000, so over 2 decades. And would you say the market for these items, the cost has increased during that time?
Significantly, yes.
So not only are we not able to keep up because of that, what has the impact over the last 3 years been of putting stronger filters on our systems and constantly flushing it? Has that had an impact on our HVAC systems?
I would say yes. And I know when we talked about this during COVID, I made everyone aware that this could have been a cost of doing it. It was, at the time, it was the right thing to do. It was what was being recommended. But we are seeing that the strains of that has taken on some of our age systems. And I think that's part of why we're in the situation that we're in. And we're working our way out of this. I mean, we have an outstanding group of people that work on these systems every single day. They go out to schools. They do everything they can to get everything up and running, and they are the backbone of what's happening with this thing, and they're staying on top of it. Our director, Ms. Moore, she's doing an outstanding job of keeping track of these systems as well, and we'll continue to make this happen every single day. But yes, it did have an impact. I'm sure it did.
Well, and absolutely doing what we needed to do to get students back in the building and in a healthy way. That was and continues to be the right thing to do, but we're seeing a back end cost to that in terms of our systems. And so any way that we can continue to help advocate for you, not only to increase this light item in general, because costs have increased in the last 23 years. We also have more buildings than we did 23 years ago, but also because these systems have, really gotten a workout the last couple years. And so making sure that we're getting back ahead of that, anything we can do to help advocate for that, we're on board. When we look at the $6 million for buses, do you have an approximation in our current market? How many buses is that ballpark?
Looking at it, and that's the thing of it. I remember when I first took this job back in 2019, how much it's increased. We've gone from $119,000 to roughly $155,000 per bus in that short period of time. So we're roughly getting anywhere close to 38 to 40 buses roughly a year. But this $6 million, what has been attributed is to vehicle replacement. That's buses and vehicles. Okay. So, if we have money, some funding's left over, it still takes a length of time to get a bus, but it's a lot easier. It has been a lot easier getting buses than it has an automobile. So we can use that money however we need.
It's also maintenance and upkeep,
yes,
not
exactly.
just the replacement.
Yep.
And just for what's this approximate size of our fleet? Like, what order of magnitude are we looking at?
I thought you might answer. Somebody would ask that question. So I do have an answer for you. Hang on one second, if you allow me.
I mean, we're looking at 500, we're looking at
500, and let me see here, it is 574, and this includes our student activity buses.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Pritchard. All right, that just helps give me kind of a ballpark of what we're looking at, almost, 10%-ish. All right, you mentioned for playgrounds that we're hoping to replace the 32 oldest structures. Is that 32 structures or 32 schools? Because, because you said there's two structures per school.
Structures.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you have 2 structures at each school. we're looking at the structures that are on that list. I mean, you know, our most significant ones. And then some of them have gotten kind of skewed, like you have one that's a little bit older than another, but
Yeah,
once we start into a school, we're going to that school.
For example, it could be that a school has an older main play
Yes.
structure for grades 3 through 5, but for some reason they've had a grant or something
Yes.
for early childhood, and they have a new structure for primary, so that wouldn't be replaced. But generally, it's not per school because it's 2 structures per
So
school.
we're looking at like 16-ish
With some exceptions. That's
schools.
right. And then, you know, we were so grateful to receive the playground funding in the CIP,
Yes.
this additional $1 million last year, because that's going to allow us to keep up with it, right, on a replacement cycle. So starting by replacing the oldest and just continuing that work. So.
Great. I was just trying to scope out if we're talking like 5 to 6 years or like 11 years, but it sounds like we're talking more 5 to 6 years to get through those 32 structures and then keeping up. Okay, fantastic. I just want to say I certainly support, I appreciate that you and your team are doing assessments across the county to figure out where the biggest needs are, both for our playground structures and our feasibility structures of our buildings. I think that's so important as we look to be as fiscally responsible as possible and putting the money and the funds where the greatest need are. As Ms. Ogburn said, it's unfortunately not an endless pot of money where we can do everything at the same time. And so I'm being very skilled in that. Mr. Pritchard, I just want to be crystal clear for our public listening. The Quioccasin rebuild continues to move on schedule, correct?
Yes, ma'am, the REQ, yes, ma'am.
The REQ's moving, and the Tuckahoe auditoriums and the other auditoriums have the design of those has not had impact on the schedule of Quioccasin,
No.
correct? They are
No, ma'am.
they're separate funding revenues, streams.
Yes.
Thank you. And then I'll just continue, as my board colleagues I know are so excited about, I will continue to be unyielding about keeping this Quioccasin rebuild on track because of just the sheer need, the health of the building, the function of the building, the programming needs. Additionally, it's the only bond project or current capital project for schools in the Tuckahoe district, but it really comes back to that need, the health of the building, the function, and the programming. And so I look forward to that continuing to move on track. So thank you so much for this look, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Shea. This is outside of graduation and some other exciting things. This is one of my favorite times a
Thank you very much, I
year.
appreciate that.
It is one of my favorite times a year because really it's the proactive planning and budgeting that I'm so proud as we look at, especially at page 7, and this slide as well, the bond that was so successful, but also slide 7, because these were meals tax, mostly meals tax with the exception of Virginia Randolph, which was ESSER 3 funding, that we are so fortunate to have the meals tax funding in Henrico. And I'm so proud that we really are looking at, as Ms. Ogburn said, like today really is part 1. And then we get part 2, which is capacity, and we get to confirm what we think, but we don't know. And look at projections because we are watching planning committee and growth in the county that Reverend Cooper and Ms. Ogburn spoke to. And then this will all come back to us in December, if I'm correct, for a vote. Is that the correct timeline for this process?
Yes, and even after the Board of Supervisors look at our request, then it'll come back to you again. So we'll get to spend a good bit of time with this. And of course, as Mr. Pritchard mentioned, opening up, we're looking at requests for 1 year of CIP funding. But what I think, to your point, Mrs. Kinsella, the board spends so much time looking at the long-term plans and kind of massaging those each year based on new information, new development, looking at trends. And so it's time well spent as we're spending time forecasting and adding that additional context.
Well, and thank you for that. And then, as I look at the playgrounds, I am very excited as to all the things that Mrs. Shea asked and were answered, because our PTAs are not ATMs. And I just appreciate the work that you guys have done to put us on a schedule for playground replacement. as necessary. And then when I look at, for example, an HVAC unit that's on the agenda for this evening at the night meeting for approval, and then I look at the amount of $8 million per year, that really doesn't buy much for a high school HVAC unit.
I mean,
Are we feeling pretty good? We're feeling pretty good about that? I mean, like to cover one school this evening is $4.5 million, right? So I'm thinking, is that 8 million, we feel good about that number? And I'm grateful it's gone from,
for maintenance and repair, and to keep us on a cycle. Now, of course, unforeseen things can happen, and then we would certainly work to identify funds outside of that line. But if we're able to get the requested amount and keep them up on the cycle we're looking to, then that would be reasonable. But certainly, I think initially, you're right, they're very costly.
They were very costly.
And
Getting more expensive every
we'll have to
day.
watch inflation.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So we do have a schedule, I mean,
yes.
that even covers the unexpected, if you will, because there seems to have been quite a bit of unexpected. And I'm just grateful that we actually have made purchases recently, well, in the past year for Greenwood and Hermitage, and I believe Glen Ellen Elementary School as well. Am I correct on that, Mr. Pritchard?
I believe so, yes.
And then we will be getting the meals tax itemization
Yes.
in the next month. I believe Ms. Ogburn spoke to that.
Yes.
I
we
know
will
she spoke
provide
to
the board
enrollment.
that. Well, both. You'll be getting both?
Yes.
And then as we're speaking to that, I'd like to put something on everyone's radar, which I think is a really creative project that Mr. Schmidt and I have been talking about and working on for all of our middle schools. Granted, it would be a pilot project beginning at one middle school, where it would be an outdoor learning lab. We have outdoor learning labs in high school. We have outdoor learning labs, for example, in our new elementary school projects. We have outdoor learning labs at the elementary, across our elementary schools. It would be fascinating to have an outdoor learning lab / field house for our middle schools is the concept. And then coupled with that concept is also thinking of Regency and our Hermitage projects, where our students had learning opportunities. I'm thinking of community partners. I'm thinking grants. I don't know. I just think it would be a learning opportunity somehow for our students, start to finish, that I look forward to discussing with colleagues and leadership. But I did want to at least put it on the radar today, saying I think it's an interesting opportunity for us at the middle school level. So thank you for that. And then that's all I had. Mr. Pritchard, thank you so much for your let me thank you one more time for our community meetings and school meetings with our Long and elementary school community. They're so excited about the rebuild, as am I.
Yep.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Chair Kinsella, that concludes items for me.
Well, all righty. Well, then that leads me to the next item on our agenda today, which is unfinished business. Board members, is there any unfinished business this afternoon? Hearing none, the next item is new business. Is there any new business this afternoon? Outstanding. Well, then the next item is the announcement of our meeting dates. The next meeting is actually about an hour from now at 6:30. It would be our monthly meeting. And then after that, the school board's next meeting will be on Thursday, November 9th, 2023, with a work session estimated to begin at 1 o'clock and a monthly meeting at 6:30 p.m. Please note these meeting times may change as needed. This meeting is now adjourned.